I'm Efrem Graham. Coming up here on this CBN NewsWatch edition for Monday, September 27th, an exclusive interview with former President Donald Trump. He's sharing his thoughts on the Biden administration and opening up about what would keep him from a presidential run in 2024. Plus, courageous Heidi Crowder. She's a woman with Down syndrome fighting against the law, allowing women to terminate pregnancy if the baby will be born with Down syndrome.
I want to see changing the law so babies like me and the gorgeous Aiden being aborted up to birth because it's downright discrimination.
And it's the land down under. The pandemic has caused fear in Australia.
The media has just scared people senseless. The average person thinks, if I catch this, I'm going to die.
See how lockdowns and attacking citizens are turning Australia into a police state. All this and more are next.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And we begin this half hour with our exclusive interview with former President Donald Trump. A large crowd came together in Georgia over the weekend to see him, and he spoke with our David Brody.
This is an invasion.
The MAGA crowds aren't dwindling. This weekend in Georgia, the former president drew another big audience. They're urging him to run again in 2024. I brought up the subject with a twist.
What will make you not run in 2024? In other words, what would be a reason not to run?
Well, I guess a bad call from a doctor or something, right? You know, you get that call and say, hey, sir, how you doing? Come on down here and see us because we got a bad report, right? So things happen through God. They happen. And, but I feel so good, and I hate what's happening to our country.
Trump has a long list of issues with this administration. After being called the most pro-life president ever, Trump says he's seen the exact opposite approach from this Catholic president.
If you look at his policies and if you look at what he's doing to religion and organized religion, if you look at what's going on, I don't know how the Catholic Church can be supportive of him.
His support among independent voters has seen a drop as well. That's mainly due to the southern border situation, and Trump puts the blame squarely on the current president.
All he had to do is, I say, go to the beach. Just relax, Joe. Go to the beach. We had it the best ever in the history of that border, the southern border. And now it's the worst in history, and it's probably the worst border anywhere in the world, if you think of it, because no border has ever been like what's happening at our border. It's the destruction from inside of our country.
Trump's critics say his unconventional toxicity and lies are responsible for destroying the country, too. The January 6th Congressional Committee wants to see all documents and correspondences that he had on that day in January. Biden's White House is set to forego the traditions of executive privilege and release those records.
It's a disgrace what's going on. This is just another continuation of, really, you'd call it the greatest witch hunt in history.
You're going to sue,
and a disgrace.
Will you look at suing them in court? Are you thinking about it?
I'll do whatever is necessary.
He'll also do whatever is necessary to let everyone know that it was his administration who delivered a vaccine in record time. But what about those mandates that have become so controversial?
Have they been discriminatory against the unvaccinated in this country?
Since I left, I think people just don't trust the Biden administration or Biden, because since I left, now you have the mandate fight, and that's a big fight, by the way, and you have to allow people their freedoms.
And now the people also wait for a decision from the Donald to see if he's ready to give the presidency another shot. David Brody, CBN News.
It's a showdown on Capitol Hill with Congress looking to trim the president's $3.5 trillion social spending bill, raising the debt ceiling and keeping the government from shutting down Thursday. Adair Hurd is following it all.
The vote on a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that was supposed to happen today has been pushed off until Thursday because Democrats admit they don't have the votes. Speaker Nancy Pelosi Sunday had to walk back today's planned vote on the bipartisan Senate bill for roads and bridges.
Let me just say we're going to pass the bill this week.
But she doesn't have the votes so far.
I'm never bringing a bill to the floor that doesn't have the votes.
Because House progressives in her party won't vote for the roads and bridges infrastructure bill, without an agreement on a $3.5 trillion so-called human infrastructure bill, what some call a wish list of big government programs, including things like a civilian climate corps and free community college, paid for by raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy.
The Build Back Better agenda is not some crazy agenda that just a few people support. It's actually the vast majority of the Democratic caucus.
And progressives are threatening to tank the bipartisan roads and bridges infrastructure bill if Congress can't pass the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill.
The votes aren't there. We have to get to that reconciliation bill first.
But moderate Democratic senators like Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona have said they won't support a human infrastructure bill that big. And even Nancy Pelosi is conceding that the massive bill will be cut. Joe Biden still thinks he'll be signing the bills this week.
I'm optimistic about this week. It's going to take the better part of the week, I think.
But there are more pressing matters for Congress. The government runs out of money Thursday and is also set to default on its debt without an increase in the debt ceiling. GOP Senator Pat Toomey told CNN Republicans would vote for a bill to fund the government, but not if it's linked to a debt ceiling increase.
I will certainly be voting no if the Democrats insist on combining the debt ceiling increase or suspension with the continuing operations of the government.
If the debt ceiling is not raised, the government could default on its debt. But Congress has always raised the debt ceiling in the past. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
The Biden administration unveiled a proposal to shield the DACA program from legal challenges. It would recreate the 2012 policy that called for Homeland Security to exercise prosecutorial discretion for young children known as dreamers. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says this is one step the Biden-Harris administration is taking to protect dreamers. The rule will be officially published Tuesday, and the public will have 60 days to submit support or opposition. Turning now to a quick look at some other stories we're following for you inside the CBN newsroom at this hour. Investigations continue into what caused Saturday's train derailment in Joplin, Montana. The accident killed 3 people and injured dozens. 150 people were on board when the train crashed while traveling from Chicago to Seattle. Today's the deadline for healthcare workers in New York to have at least one COVID shot. Governor Kathy Hochul is preparing for a worker shortage and says she will call for medically trained National Guard members and healthcare workers from other states if that is needed. The second annual March for the Martyrs was held Saturday in Washington, D.C. Hundreds prayed against Christian persecution around the world. The night featured advocates and testimonies from survivors persecuted for their faith. Facebook has announced it is pausing work on Instagram for kids. The company has faced backlash over a report from the Wall Street Journal saying Instagram is harmful to teens, most notably for girls. The head of Instagram says critics of Instagram Kids will see this as an acknowledgement that the project is a bad idea. That's not the case. The reality is that kids are already online, and we believe that developing age-appropriate experiences designed specifically for them is far better for parents than we are today. Instagram will pause its work to address concerns with parents, experts, policymakers, and regulators. Coming up, she's been called courageous, the courageous Heidi Crowder. See why this woman with Down syndrome is making headlines right now around the world for voicing her opinion about a law in the UK. We've got the story for you when we come back. This woman with Down syndrome says she is going to keep fighting a pro-abortion law allowing women to terminate their pregnancies up until birth if testing shows the unborn baby will likely have Down syndrome. Heidi Crowder says she says even though a judge dismissed her case against the law, she is not finished. She plans to continue fighting for the rights of children with Down syndrome to be born, believing in the value of their lives. She pointed to another British citizen who did not give up as an example of her moral battle during his day, William Wilberforce, and his unpopular stand against slavery.
When Wilberforce wanted to change the law on slavery, he didn't give up. Even when events didn't always go his way. And when the going got tough, he kept going. And I'm going to do the same because I want to see changing the law to stop babies like me and the gorgeous Aiden being aborted up to birth because it's downright discrimination.
Crowder's suit says the law is not only discriminatory, it also violates the European Convention on Human Rights. Our media partner, FaithWire.com, was the first to bring you this story, and Tragon Phillips is with FaithWire.com. He joins us now with more. So, Trey, powerful images there of these children who are likely the very ones that Heidi wants to protect. She lost her case, as we know. So what is her next move?
So she's just vowing to keep fighting. I think she's going to, she wants to continue being public and front-facing. She and the two other complainants who are on the case plan to do more of what we just saw and heard her doing, which is going out and just speaking to the public and trying to educate people around her, other Britons, about what the law says and how she views it as discriminatory against people who are like her.
What kind of support is she getting in the UK?
So she's getting a lot of support on the ground. Like when you go and you see where she's speaking, whether it's at the steps of the court there in that clip or elsewhere, she gathers large crowds. There's a lot of public support for her online as well, among the UK and obviously in the US as well. But in the situation in the UK is a bit different than it is here. They're a bit more pro-abortion than we are. So she's got a tough road ahead for her. It's definitely an upward climb.
Why is her fight so important, not just in her country, but really for the world when it comes to abortion and babies with disabilities?
You know, I think she put a fine point on it by saying that it enables discrimination against people who have Down syndrome or other sort of genetic disorders, because in the UK they allow abortion up to 24 weeks or up until birth if a child shows in prenatal testing to potentially have Down syndrome. So this is about discrimination. It is about human rights, and people like her raising their voices, particularly people with Down syndrome, saying, "Look, I am just as valuable as any other human, and as believers we know, made in the image of God, and I deserve just as much rights as anybody else." So I'm glad to see her raising her voice, and I think it's important for people like her to be part of the conversation, because this is the people that these laws are impacting.
Indeed. Now, as we reported, the judge dismissed her case. Any idea as to why?
So he said in his ruling, it was a panel, but the lead judge said in his ruling that the religious objections and maybe even the emotional feelings that these complainants had, including Heidi, was just not enough, in his opinion, to overturn the scientific facts in his mind that support leaving this law in place. So it's not really clear how they're going to go about this legally in the future. But that was his decision in this case, and we'll see what lawsuits Heidi and others might bring in the future.
Indeed, indeed. Trey Phillips with FaithWire.com. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Still ahead, Australians are calling it a police state. Extreme crackdowns over the coronavirus, despite few deaths in comparison to the overall population. We're going to have that story for you when we come back. COVID-19 has turned the land down under upside down. Australia was once known for its fierce individualism and defense of personal freedoms. But now extreme lockdowns and intense tracking of citizens have some calling the country a police state. All this when fewer than 1,200 residents have died from COVID in the nation of 25 million. Dale Hurd is on the story.
A viral tweet in Australian posted what they said is a view of the world's largest prison from space, a map of Australia. Australia is still a democracy, but its COVID restrictions are severe. It's hard to enter or leave the country unless you're a politician or a celebrity. Citizens are tracked with apps and soon by facial recognition. In some states, you have to have your phone scanned before entering a church. And some have been arrested for simply posting on social media about protest against COVID restrictions. The rest of the world is starting to ask if Australia can still be called a free country. Australia's lockdown has been so draconian, it's brought comparisons on social media to how Australia began, as a prison colony. This pregnant Australian mother was handcuffed and hauled away by cops in front of her children for simply posting on Facebook about a lockdown protest. The charge was incitement.
What on earth? Excuse me, what on earth?
Just put your phone down.
Can you record this? I'm in my pajamas.
What's
I
this?
had an ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant.
This leader of an anti-lockdown group, also arrested for incitement, has now been in jail for 3 weeks.
You're under arrest for incitement.
Have you guys been following me?
Police helicopters look for lockdown violators, like these folks trying to enjoy an evening on a rooftop. And the government has fired rubber bullets and tear gas at anti-lockdown protesters, including children. James Allen, Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland, calls it heavy-handed despotism.
It's been appalling in Australia, and I say that as a big fan of Australia. I'm Canadian, you can tell from the accent. But it's come as a real shock to me how conservative friends are perfectly happy to go along with this.
Australia consists of 6 states and 2 territories, each with their own COVID restrictions. Under a new home quarantine plan for international travelers, if you don't send the government your photo and location when it sends you a text, the police will come to your door. Melbourne pastor Paul Furlong has been arrested 3 times and placed in solitary confinement for opening his church during the lockdowns.
The reason I did was for what I believe was a greater law, and that was to obey the word of God. And so I had to choose God's law over man's law.
This church in Sydney, shown before the lockdown, was raided and fined for holding what authorities called an illegal service and for not scanning people's phones before they entered. Some pastors are now concerned that the government could require a vaccine passport before entering a church. We asked Evan Mulholland at Australia's conservative think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs, if he still considers Australia a free country.
Well, it's a good question. It's a question a lot of people across the political spectrum have been asking. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen when the political and cultural elites slowly take away our freedoms and they become normalized.
Australians have also begun turning in one another to authorities, East German style. In this tweet, an Australian mother was desperate to find a way home with her son and needed to cross a state border, violating lockdown restrictions. She was turned in to police. With this kind of behavior, you might think many thousands of Australians have died from COVID. But the death toll is under 1,200 out of a nation of 25 million people, or 0.0047% of the population. Almost 3 times that many Australians die every week from normal causes. But one poll showed most Australians favor living without freedom because they fear COVID more than any other Western nation.
You know, the media has just scared people senseless. The average person thinks, if I catch this, I'm going to die.
There have been several large and sometimes violent demonstrations against the lockdowns and against planned vaccine passports, and hundreds have been arrested. The government says the death toll would have been much worse without lockdowns, and is saying now that life can only return to normal when most of the country is vaccinated.
They describe giving back our freedoms as some sort of a treat, as some sort of a reward, something that can be given back to us and aren't our fundamental freedoms that were stolen from us in the first place.
The Australian journalist Clive James once said the problem with Australians is not that so many of them are descended from convicts, but that so many are descended from prison officers. It's a quote that's being talked about a lot these days. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, Denzel Washington talks about his faith and shares some of his conversations with God. We'll hear what that sounds like when we come back. Stay with us. Oscar-winning actor Denzel Washington says God has been telling him in recent years to feed my sheep. He was speaking at an Orlando men's conference, and the Christian Post reports that he told them he wasn't quite sure what that means and it could differ from time to time. So he's looking to pastors to help guide him. During an onstage discussion with Pastor A.R. Bernard, the senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn, New York, Washington told the audience, quote, "At 66, getting ready to be 67, having just buried my mother, I made a promise to her and to God not just to do good the right way, but to honor my mother and my father by the way I live my life the rest of my days on earth. I'm here to serve, to help, to provide." Washington also addressed the role of men in our changing world. He says men may not need to follow the John Wayne formula, but strength, leadership, power, authority, guidance, and patience are God's gift to the men, and they should cherish them and not abuse them. Time now for your Monday Motivation. Here's a word to jumpstart your week. Watch your words. What you say matters. Scripture tells us life and death are in the power of the tongue. Be sure you're choosing to speak life. Your words move God. With that word, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday and be sure to have yourself a wonderful week. Do that with purpose and do it on purpose. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. I want to remind you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. There you can find them at any time. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. Feel free to email us. The address is right there at the bottom of your screen, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We would love to hear from you. We look forward to seeing you right back here, same time tomorrow.